So the question is, should you get or upgrade to the Shure SM7 microphone? The SM7 seems to be very popular these days. It seems to have had a bit of a renaissance. This is a big broadcast microphone that you would typically see in places like radio station DJ applications. Sometimes you'd see them in the recording studio. The Michael Jackson Thriller album recorded some vocals with an SM7. But I think Joe Rogan has sold a whole bunch of them because you see him on his podcast, and I'm seeing them more and more regularly on YouTube channels and podcasts and for voiceover. And so it's become a popular microphone, and it's a great microphone. It's a Shure dynamic broadcast microphone, a big mic, kind of in the same category as an Electro-Voice RE20, for example. The RE20 has got a very different sound to it, but I think they both are positioned in the same market space. And so, do I think that you should get a Shure SM7 for your podcast or your video production or for voiceover? Well, if that's the sort of thing you want, and it's not a budget problem for you, yeah, buy what you want. Absolutely, it's a great mic. Now, the question might be, if I think that it's such a great mic and it's such an industry standard, how come I don't use a Shure SM7? Out of all the mics I own, that's one of them that I don't own. Well, it's because I don't think it's particularly good value. Now you have to ask, why would you want an SM7? Is it for the look or for the sound? Now, if it's for the look, well, if you want something that looks like an SM7, get an SM7. Presuming that you're willing to pay the price for that. But if you want something that sounds like an SM7, I think you can get there, or really close, for a lot less money. And the SM7 also has some other issues, for me personally, that make it undesirable. So here are the issues that keep me away from the SM7. Now, as I say this, I want to make it clear that I think it's a great microphone. Generally, I'm a big fan of Shure microphones. I like almost all of their products that are above the really low entry level. I think they make great stuff, and the SM7 is a broadcast standard. I mean, there's a testimony for you right there. But the things that keep me away from the SM7 is, one, the physical size. I don't have an issue with using a big bulky microphone, but it's also not a selling point for me. I think a smaller microphone is a little less conspicuous and is just a little more flexible in the places I can get it into. And if I have to haul equipment around, well, I'd rather haul small stuff than big stuff. So the size of the SM7 for me is a little bit of a deterrent. I know for some people that's a big selling point. The other issue that is a big deterrent for me is the SM7 does not include a transformer in the microphone. Most dynamic microphones do, which has the effect of boosting the output voltage level. And so the output level of an SM7 is very low, which means that in order to get a reasonable amount of output from the SM7, you're probably going to have to close talk that pretty tight. And in order to get a usable signal with an SM7, chances are you're going to need a preamplifier with a lot of gain. A lot of consumer-level preamplifiers that you might be using or audio interfaces in your computer just don't quite have enough gain to work effectively with an SM7. And so you may not be able to get that really hot signal level out of it that helps you to get recordings that have high signal-to-noise ratio. So if you have the gain cranked all the way up on your preamp in order to deal with the low output level of an SM7, that also means that you're going to be boosting up the noise floor. And so getting a nice clean recording without background hiss in it might be a little challenging with an SM7 unless you're using some pretty high-end preamplifiers or, a high-end audio interface in your computer. So in addition to the cost of the microphone, you may find yourself having to get a high-quality audio interface to work with that microphone, and that'll increase the expense somewhat. Or else you might need a pre-amplifier in line. such as a cloud lifter. So the microphone goes to the cloud lifter, which gives you some more gain, and then into your preamp. And again, that's another additional expense, and it complicates things. And so the low output level of the SM7 I find to be a deterrent. As a matter of fact, I like to work with microphones that have fairly hot output level, and that's one of the reasons why I tend to migrate toward using condenser microphones. Condenser microphones that are phantom powered, generally speaking, have higher output level than dynamic microphones. And that higher output level gets me up higher above the noise floor in my preamp, so I get cleaner sounding recordings. So the low output level of the SM7, that's not so good for me. And then, just generally speaking, I don't think it's a great value, because the SM7 is based upon Shure's Unidyne 3 capsule. The Unidyne 3 was invented in the early 1960s. And there's a number of mics that Shure has that are based on that capsule design. Around 1965, they came out with the SM57 general purpose dynamic microphone that uses the Unidyne capsule. About a year later, they came out with the Shure SM58 vocal microphone that uses the same capsule. So these two mics are essentially the same mic, with the exception of the pop filter that is provided on the SM58. Now, I'm not saying that they sound exactly the same because of the different filters that are on these microphones. They have some very slight sound character differences, and personally, my preference is the 57. But they're very, very close. They share the same element inside of them for picking up sound. Now, Shure tells us that the Unidyne capsule that is inside of the SM7 is a different capsule than is used in the SM57. And I'm sure that's probably true because the SM7 does not have a transformer, so it's probably made to have a slightly different impedance so it interfaces with your audio equipment properly. But having said that, the capsules between the 57 and the SM7 look the same. They are extremely similar. If Shure didn't tell me that they were actually a different product, I would think they're the same. They sound the same. They act the same. They look the same. They are very, very similar. And that's not to say that the SM7 and the SM57 sound the same. There are some minor differences. Very minor differences. The larger body of the SM7 allows that microphone to have a little bit more low-end response. And so, compared to the SM7, the 57 sounds just a little tiny bit thin on the very bottom end. And some folks would say that the SM57 sounds just a little tiny bit more ragged on the upper mid-range. But the differences are minor, very minor. Like I say, they both share the same capsule heritage. It's almost identical capsules between those two mics, the 57 and the SM7. And I would say that if you were to record your vocals, if you're doing a audiobook, for example, using an SM7, and then you finish a paragraph and you swap out the mic for an SM57, and you get the levels set the same, I would think that most casual listeners wouldn't even notice a difference. And if you carefully tweaked the equalization on the 57 to give it just a little bit of bass boost, and maybe soften the high end, high mid-range, just a little bit, not much, just a little tiny bit, I think even critical listeners would probably, for the most part, have a difficulty discerning which microphone you're using, a 57 or the SM7. Now, one of the things about the 57 is it does not include a pop filter. So these plosives, words that begin with P, where you have a puff of air out of your mouth, could hit the diaphragm and create poor sound artifacts. So if you use an SM57, you'd need to use some kind of windscreen with it or a pop blocker. Shure sells this foam windscreen right here, which is a perfect addition for a 57 to make it sound very, very close to the SM7. And so that's why I don't have the SM7, is because I think that the SM57 is a microphone that gets me about 95% of the way there to the sound of an SM7. It's almost indistinguishable. And this is a fraction of the price. And so for the price of one SM7, I could have several SM57s that do the same job. So I think if you're going after the sound of an SM7, I think before you make that jump, and if budget is any concern to you, try the SM57 with a pop filter to see if that gets you to where you want to be, because I think it will probably get you pretty darn close for a fraction of the price. And with an SM57, you don't need any special preamp. It's got enough output level to give you a usable signal with a practical, affordable preamp. So that's my thoughts on the SM7. There's nothing wrong with the mic. It's a broadcast standard. Lots of people love them. But you're going to spend a lot of money to get into an SM7 when for a fraction of the price you can get darn near the same sound using an SM57 or possibly a SM58. But then again, if the aesthetics of the microphone are really important to you and you want a big microphone that looks like that, well, then there's no substitute. Although if you are looking for a big broadcast microphone of that style, I'd suggest you also take a look at the Electro Voice RE20, which is another excellent microphone. It's got a different sound characteristic, but it's also well loved in the industry. And I'm not expressing a preference over the SM7 versus the RE20. I think they're both fantastic. And depending upon your voice, one may work a little better than the other for you. So that's my opinion. I hope you found it interesting or entertaining. If you'd like to chime in with your opinion, respectfully, I'd appreciate it. Just feel free to drop your note below and let me know what you think. For those of you who have subscribed, I really appreciate it because your actions of subscribing, hitting that thumbs up, or hitting the bell icon for notifications, all of these things tell YouTube to help promote this channel to others, and that helps this channel grow. And I appreciate it. So thanks for tuning in, and I hope to see you again soon on another upcoming episode.